A whirlwind of a Thursday for Miami, losing two key players to the transfer portal. Not even LifeWallet can get that back.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. Happy Friday and welcome in to the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And reminder, you can check out the show ad-free on Amazon Music if you have not done so yet. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Folks, I will happily admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or the Google Play Store. All right, Isaac, it is about 6 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday. We're time stamping this because news these days is at an all-time high. It seems to be coming and going. And so we're trying to get the show out with as much updates as we have at this current moment, because the NBA draft entry deadline is this Saturday at midnight Eastern time. The portal will close next Wednesday on May 1st. That will be for both undergraduate students and grad students. That is a change from last year when we had, I think, Cam Spencer and Paul Mulcahy were in the transfer portal in like July or something like that. That is no longer going to be the case. Every player who is planning to transfer will need to be in the transfer portal by May 1st. That means there is going to be a whole bunch of college basketball activity in the next 5 or 6 days. There's been a bunch here on Thursday. But Isaac, we're going to lead talking about Miami. We're going to get to Louisville and everything going on with them and their addition of Chucky Hepburn. We're going to talk about the Big 12 Big East battle, which we saw all the matchups and the dates for those games. We're going to talk about what that means to close out the show. But I do want to start with Jim Larranaga's team, because in a matter of like less than an hour, we found out on Thursday that both Wooga Poplar and Norchad Omier are planning to enter the NCAA transfer portal. And these are names that have been kind of rumored throughout this process since the season ended, since Miami's season ended, which was quite a bit before a lot of other teams ended, just because they did not have a particularly good season. But we are now officially know that both these players are going to be in the transfer portal. Isaac, what were your initial thoughts to seeing these two players, these kind of stalwarts for this Miami program the last couple of years, deciding to put their name in the portal?
Andy, I hate to say, but I'm like numb to it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's just the state of things now, where it's like, we just expect these things to happen. I have loved watching these dudes play the past couple years for Miami. I mean, obviously this year, it just didn't work for a couple various reasons that we've talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
But man, 2 years ago, they were just humming. Norchad Omier is this undersized 5 that still like pushes everyone around and does things, averaged a double-double. I'll check it after I shut up and you start talking again. If I remember correctly, he and Armando only 2 ACC players to average a double-double this year, and maybe the year before. I'm going to fact check myself here in just a second on that, but both with he and Poplar. I mean, this is tough, because it's two dudes that it's like, man, if we could have them for another year, could we reclaim some of the of what happened this year? I mean, you got Lynn Kidd coming in from Virginia Tech, who I am a big fan of, some of that other stuff. And so also Brandon Johnson from East Carolina, the Pirates. And so, Andy, it's a bummer. And I think that's where I'm at. I don't want to be numb to it, but I think I am.
Yeah, and for Miami, they had a handful of other players who had already entered the transfer portal, but nobody nearly as impactful as Omier or Poplar. With no disrespect to Bensley Joseph, who's a talented player. He's going to go play for Kim English at Providence. We also had Michael Nwoko enter the portal. He's going to Mississippi State. AJ Casey is going to St. Louis. They also had Christian Watson, Ja'Kai Robertson, and Nick Cassano all depart via the portal. But these are huge losses for Miami, for a team that, again, had those back-to-back deep runs in the NCAA tournament. It kind of felt like they were primed to have another really good year this past season, but injuries really kind of cropped up throughout the season, and they just were never able to find that success. Ended up having a significantly disappointing season in the ACC. But to see this happen, I mean, it's just frustrating, and I think you're right that there is this kind of numbness to it as just today, before we hit the record button, we see Kadari Richmond enter the portal from Seton Hall. Like there's just been so many programs that have been decimated by the transfer portal. And the flip side, though, here is that there's two really talented players who are now available and are going to end up somewhere where they can be a really significant contributor, probably for a really, really good team. Right now, Norchad Omier is the 5th ranked player in the transfer portal, according to Evan Miyakawa's transfer portal rankings. Of course, like you said, he averaged a double-double last year, 17 and 10.
Let me add, I left somebody out. It was just he and Baycott this year, but also in the previous season, 22-23, they were joined by, at that point, Syracuse's Jesse Edwards. So there were 3 players. I left them out. I'm so sorry, Jesse. Hope you and the Mountaineers are doing well.
I would have not pulled Jesse Edwards. I don't blame you at all for not being able to pull that one. That would have been an incredible get.
But other than that, legitimately, Baycott and Omier, the only two to average a double-double in the ACC the last 2 seasons.
And he's an insanely efficient scorer, too. About 60% on 2-pointers last year. That took a huge jump as a 3-point shooter, which I think is really going to dramatically improve his odds of being an NBA player. He was 35% last year on threes. He shot 2.2 per game, which is not a huge volume by any stretch, but his previous career high in terms of 3-point attempts per game was less than half per game, 0.4. So for him to jump to take basically 4 times as many 3-pointers this year and still knock him down at a 35% clip. I mean, if you're a college coach right now and you got the NIL funds and you're looking out, like, you're not going to find a whole lot of more versatile, dynamic players available for your team than Norchad Omier. He's experienced. He's been in deep runs in the NCAA tournament. He's a tenacious rebounder. He can score around the rim. He's now got at least some semblance of an outside shot. It may not be, you're not going to go put him in an offense where he's going to shoot 5 a game necessarily, but he can do so many different things. And I mean, this is a really tremendous talent that is now available. It's tough for Miami. It's tough for the ACC if he doesn't stay in the conference, but a really talented player who's now out there. And I imagine getting phone calls from every reputable program in the entire country.
And Andy, it sounds like there is early St. John's chatter on this thing as we record. Obviously, that is not fully confirmed or sourced, but so I'm just speaking complete rumor there. So we don't want to.
Man, he's a great fit in a Patino offense.
Oh, when I think about Soriano and then him out, and I'm like, oh, Omier makes a ton of sense for Patino. So yeah, that's really interesting. As for Poplar, Andy, look, this is going to be a massive get for whoever can land Wooga Poplar. He's a guard with size. That's something people are looking for. He's 6'5", has just 1 year left. Had 13.1 points, 4.8 boards, and 2.1 assists this year, but shot 38.5% from 3 on 5.6. And so even beyond the size, what is the number one commodity in basketball, Andy? It's scoring the basketball, particularly making shots. And that's what Wooga Poplar does. He's somebody that is going to have, similar to what, we're expecting if Omier isn't a DNC do not contact to St. John's, that Poplar is going to have a litany of people knocking down his door.
Yeah, and I think if you're Miami, you lose 2 oversized guards who had strong ability to shoot the 3-point ball, because Kyshawn George is gone as well. This was kind of the third headline. They say like bad news comes in threes. That was the case for Miami, because Omier enters the portal, Poplar enters the portal, and I don't know how much optimism folks had about Kyshawn George potentially returning to Miami for a sophomore year.
Andy, zero.
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of optimism for it, but in case people missed this, George has confirmed that he is hiring an agent. He is not returning to college basketball. He is staying in the NBA draft process, and I do not blame him. He is a 6'8" guard. He played 23 minutes per game. His numbers don't pop off the page in a huge way. 7.5 points, 3 boards, a little over 2 assists per game. But Isaac, he shot 41% from 3 as a 6'8" guard that Coach Larranaga occasionally ran out as a point guard. NBA scouts who are looking at this incredibly weak draft class, who are now seeing a 6'8" potential point guard who shoots 40+% from 3, Yeah, he's going to get plenty of attention, and he totally should get plenty of attention. I don't blame him for making this decision. But again, it's another loss for Miami, a team that now has to rebuild pretty much from the ground up after a disappointing season. That is not an easy thing to do for Coach L and the Canes.
Yeah, and I hope they're able to. I mean, it's been really cool. Not obviously this year, but the 2 seasons before that, to see them make those good deep March runs. So Andy, really curious to see what happens there as we look more into what the ACC has as they add in 3 new members. Speaking of the ACC, Pat Kelsey is transforming that Louisville roster as Coach L is going to be trying to do down in South Florida, and just landed a big time Big Ten guard. How are those pieces coming together? We'll answer that question here in just a second. Right after I tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, from LED headlights to exhaust kits and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Why? Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Andy, it would be putting it kindly to say that things have not gone well at Louisville the past 2 seasons. I hate to have to say that, but it's just frankly very true and still very kind. But Pat Kelsey coming over from Charleston. This dude is on a heater.
Yeah.
On Thursday, they land. Look, there's a whole bunch of guards out there, Andy. I'm by the way, as an aside, are all these guards going to find landing spots? Because I don't know that they are.
Yeah, it's insane.
Anyway, one of them has found a home, and that's Chucky Hepburn, leaving Wisconsin, heading down to Louisville. Maybe he'll bring some cheese with him. Andy will have to wait and see. He could put it on that Papa John's pizza. But Andy, I think we'll talk Chucky Hepburn, but the big headline here, for example, Sports Illustrated's Kevin Sweeney tweeted this out. Louisville started with 0 scholarship players. Since then, they've added 8, Andy, 8 transfers. Chucky Hepburn, who we just mentioned, Koren Johnson from Washington, Terrence Edwards out of James Madison. That's a huge pickup. Man, Javon Hadley from Colorado, Aboubacar Traore from Long Beach State, one of my favorite names, Ali Khalifa from BYU, who did not, interestingly enough, follow his head coach an hour east of Louisville over to Lexington. But by the way, he's redshirting this season. And then 2 guys came with him from Charleston, Rain Smith and James Scott. Andy, let's start with the Chucky Hepburn side of this. What do you like about Hepburn at Louisville?
Yeah, it's a really solid fit. And to your point about the amount of guards in the transfer portal, I mean, yeah, it's in Lamont Butler enters, Kadari Richmond enters. Like, there have been so many talented guards who've entered the portal. Now, Louisville added basically 6 of them, depending on what you consider Terrence Edwards or Javon Hadley. They're kind of bigger guards. But if certain teams are going to add 5 or 6 guards, then yeah, I think all those guards are eventually going to find themselves a home. But I don't think that this is going to be the strategy for every team out there. For Hepburn in particular, he gets an opportunity to go to a team that plays a more high-tempo offense than he was playing for Greg Gard at Wisconsin. I think that should help boost his scoring numbers in a way. He was never a big-time scorer necessarily at Wisconsin. His scoring numbers dipped a bit when they brought A.J. Storr in as well. So now he gets an opportunity to run an offense that, again, is going to be more up and down, going to score more points. I think Kelsey's teams have averaged close to 85, 90 points in his last couple of years at Charleston. You kind of expect he's bringing in players who we believe is going to fit into that system for the Cardinals. And you look at Hepburn, and he's probably going to be, flanked in the backcourt by Johnson and Edwards and Hadley and all these guys. Traore is certainly going to play as well. So I like the fit, but it's hard to determine, like, we can determine what Chucky Hepburn would look like in a Pat Kelsey style offense. But until we see all these pieces together, it's kind of hard to know. And I think that that's where a lot of teams are in terms of evaluating what their roster looks like, what their talent looks like. Like, you can go out and get the most talented players, but you have to make sure the pieces fit. And I'm optimistic about this particular group for Pat Kelsey. I think he's a very brilliant basketball mind, in particular offensively. I think that he's gone after players who are good defensively, like Hepburn, and like some of these other guys have good defensive instincts. Traore was a good defensive player at Long Beach State. So I do think that that's going to help them out. But ultimately, it's going to be a lot of puzzles for Pat Kelsey to figure out where does everybody fit best, what role makes the most sense. But Hepburn being the person who's going to kind of steer the ship, you could do a lot worse than Chucky Hepburn in that role.
And Andy, part of the issue with Khalifa redshirting is they could really use him in the front court.
Yeah, they need size badly.
They do. They need size. Khalifa 6'10" could do that. I'm curious to see if James Scott can do anything, but he's one of the guys that came from Charleston. He's 6'11", but that transferring up is always a question.
Yeah.
And saying that, Andy, leads me to say Pat Kelsey's been doing that, what you talked about, his offense at Charleston. And let's just be honest, with players that are not Louisville high major level. I'm really curious to see how that then now translates to the ACC level, right? Like, when you get in better athletes, when you get in better shooters.
Yeah.
Like, for Chucky Hepburn, you talked about going from the yawn of Wisconsin to playing in this kind of offense. I mean, he could blow up. And who knows what that 9.2 points a game at Wisconsin looks like in a Louisville offense, Andy.
Yeah, and I think this is part of a larger conversation that perhaps we can have another time if we do end up fleshing out that all those guards in the portal conversation, because the amount of players who are leaving to go play in a very different system, that really fascinates me, because it's a risk. It's a risk for the player. It's a risk for the coach. And Hepburn, I think, is safer than a lot of the other ones. I mean, this guy started over 100 games in the Big Ten. Anybody who has started that many games at a high level is probably going to be able to adjust. And I think you just watch Chucky Hepburn play and you're like, yeah, I don't think that a faster pace is going to be necessarily a problem for him. But I think about somebody like Aiden Mahaney, who's in the transfer portal, and he's getting, he was connected to Virginia. That makes sense. St. Mary's in Virginia, not only coached by coaches named Bennett, but they also have a very similar slow-paced style. But if like Mahaney were to go to UConn, which has also been rumored, like, can he adjust to that speed, to that tempo, to that? And he's also going mid-major to high major. Granted, St. Mary's is they play a tough non-conference schedule and they're a top 25 team pretty regularly. But I'm curious about players like him, somebody like Lamont Butler, who's also been familiar with a system that's pretty specific at San Diego State. What does that look like if he tries to go play at a faster pace somewhere else? It's just intriguing. And I think you look at, to kind of pin it back to Louisville here, you look at the variety of players. I mean, they got guys coming up from the mid-major level who thrived, like Terrence Edwards, 17 points. I mean, there's no doubt he can play at a high level. Same with Aboubacar Traore. I mean, he was fantastic, really good rebounder, really good distributor at Long Beach State, did a little bit of everything. And we've seen guys come from the Big West and have immediate success. Latrell Wrightsell, Zion Pullen at Florida. Like, there've been quite a few of them lately. DJ Davis is another one. And so I'm not super worried about those players' ability to adjust to the ACC. It's more of like, you're bringing guys in from a Wisconsin system, a Washington system, a Colorado system, all very, very, very different. And so for Kelsey, like, that's just a lot of different, a lot of teaching you have to do to guys who all come from very different backgrounds. Not saying he can't do it, just saying that it's not as simple as, when you're playing, NBA Live or Madden or whatever, and you're just pulling a bunch of guys together and going for it. It's a little bit more complicated in real life.
Andy, in 2 years under Kenny Payne, Louisville won a grand total of 12 games. It's a very early prediction. Over under 12 wins for Louisville next season.
Yeah, I think over for sure. In part because I don't think Kelsey's done. I think they are going to add a big or two. We'll see who it ends up being. But if they get any kind of quality rim protection, again, maybe Kelsey's more confident in James Scott, who blocked 1.5 shots per game last year. If he can be that guy, if they can get somebody else who can do that, I think that really, really helps this team. I think they're still going to struggle defensively, and I still think there's some questions on this roster. Obviously, it's late April, and they started with 0, so of course there's still going to be questions. But yeah, I think they win more than 12 games. I think they're in the middle of the pack of the ACC. I wouldn't be shocked if Pat Kelsey does what everybody hoped Kenny Payne would do, which is take this team to the NCAA tournament in his first season as head coach. Wouldn't be a shock at all to see Kelsey pull that off. Well, Isaac, we got matchups and dates for next season's Big East Big 12 matchup, but the 3 best matchups, they're all on the same night. We're going to talk about why that might be in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Monopoly Go. Folks, we've all been there, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime, the scoreboard is just not looking good. You're feeling low, you're not sure you or your team can pull out a W. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There is so much you can do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. You can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. And you can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or the Google Play Store. All right, Isaac, we talked ACC in the first 2 segments of today's show, talking about Miami and their losses, talking about Louisville and their gains, but we are going to close out the show and the week talking about the Big 12 Big East battle. The matchups have been set. The games will take place between December 3rd and December 8th of next season. There's going to be 11 total games. That means every school in the Big East will participate. There are going to be some schools in the Big 12 left out of this event just because it is a much bigger conference. And Isaac, taking a look at the matchups here and the dates, there's some interesting things going on here. And what I want to do is I'm going to read to you the 4 matchups on December 4th.
Okay.
In particular.
Okay.
Because it strikes me as the most compelling matchups you could have, 3 of them at least, and then one that's not so compelling. I'll let you and the listeners guess which one we might be talking about there.
I'm ready. I'm
December
listening.
4th. Baylor at UConn, a battle of 2 coaches who turned down the Kentucky head coaching job this offseason. You also have Kansas at Creighton, really fun Midwest battle there. Marquette at Iowa State, offense versus defense. And then DePaul at Texas Tech.
Okay. And clearly here, DePaul at Texas Tech is the headliner of the entire event. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Andy, like, regardless of what's happening, because it's December 3rd through December 8th. Regardless of what's happening December 3rd, 6th, 7th, and 8th, this is odd to me that you take DePaul, Texas Tech out of the question, but without even seeing or talking about the other matchups yet, which we will, Baylor at UConn, Kansas at Creighton, Marquette at Iowa State are clearly the 3 most intriguing matchups of this entire thing. Why in all of God's green goodness would you not spread these out? I think back to the Big Ten ACC matchup or battle that we've had for so long, in which there would be one key marquee battle each night, one Tuesday, one Wednesday. You've got this event is not just 2 nights. It's spread out over 3, 4. It looks like there's no games on the 5th, but 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. That's 5 nights. And you're putting your 3 best games on the same night. Yeah. Andy, that is a critical miss from these organizers. Yeah, it's really baffling to me. And I like the games I like the opening games. December 3rd, the 2 matchups we have there, BYU at the Dunk going to Providence, Cincinnati at Villanova. I'm intrigued by both those matchups. I like those. Yeah. I think those are 2 fun matchups, and I don't hate that they headline the first day. And then you got the 4 games we talked about on December 4th. They take off December 5th. But then December 6th, you got Georgetown at West Virginia and Xavier at TCU.
Neither of those are all that compelling to me. And that seems like a day where if you wanted a headline, if you wanted eyeballs on this challenge, the Big 12 Big East challenge, instead of putting two games that probably aren't going to generate all that much attention, this is where you should have put Marquette at Iowa State, instead of having it sandwiched in there with the other two big games of Baylor and UConn and Kansas at Creighton. And then after that, December 7th, you got Kansas State at St. John's. Yeah, I'll admit to being intrigued by that, especially with the amount of changes that both those rosters are going through. And then Butler at Houston, which we can talk about the matchups in particular, because that one kind of stands out to me as being a bit unique. And then the last day is just one game, and that's Oklahoma State at Seton Hall, another game where I'm kind of confused by why those two teams got matched up with each other. But again, that's not going to draw the eyeballs that any of those other games would have drawn, that they have all on the same day on the 4th.
And that's the thing. If you're going to have a standalone game on the last one, you say, all right, we've got a matchup that we put together here featuring 3 of the last 4 national champions. Right. That doesn't make sense, Isaac, because there's only 2 teams in the game. Yeah, that's because UConn has won the last 2 of them. Baylor at UConn. If you're going to have a standalone game on December 8th to wrap up this whole thing, I don't need Oklahoma State, Seton Hall determining who wins the Big East, Big 12 match. I mean, that's just, Andy, it's because that's the other thing that I guess we haven't said is not only are the 3 best matchups all on the same night, they're on the second night of a 6-night event.
Yeah.
Like those matchups should be December 6th, December 7th, and December 8th.
Yeah. It's really... Go ahead.
I'm sure there's some sort of reasoning and rationale behind it, but until I find out what that is, and until I find out what it is and it makes sense to me, I'm angry and disappointed at this, Andy.
And I think like not only are the matchups on like the scheduling of it all kind of odd, but some of the matchups don't make a lot of sense. Like I love Kansas at Creighton. That makes sense to me. Baylor at UConn makes sense to me. Marquette at Iowa State, fun offense, defense. That makes sense. Some of the other ones I can dig too, but I don't understand why Houston drew Butler. Like, I don't understand why that's the team that they picked for them. I don't understand, why Texas Tech drew DePaul. One of the things we talked about down here was the teams that are out. So there's 16 teams in the Big 12 next season, and that includes the 4 new corner schools, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah. None of them were included in this. I think that's understandable.
Sure.
That means that there's 12 Big 12 teams that could have been a part of this. The school that was left out is Central Florida. And the question I posed in the notes was, would you rather be Central Florida and left out of this challenge, or would you rather be Texas Tech, a team that earned a 6th seed last year, that for a good chunk of the season was in first place in the Big 12, who gets their, this pre-scheduled, allegedly marquee non-conference game, they draw DePaul. I think I'd rather be Central Florida and left out of this event. And look, Chris Holtman's done a good job at DePaul. I really don't want to denigrate them. I think that they're going to be better next year because they really have nowhere to go but up. And maybe this game ends up not being that much of a drag on Texas Tech's non-conference schedule. But why wasn't that Oklahoma State? Why wasn't that West Virginia? Like, why did Texas Tech draw DePaul as opposed to somebody else who finished with the worst record last year? And why did Houston draw a pretty pedestrian Butler team when they could have drawn Villanova, or they could have drawn Providence, or they could have drawn one of the big 3 in Creighton, Marquette, or UConn? Instead, they draw a team that's not really going to help their non-conference schedule much.
For Texas Tech, at least they don't have to leave Lubbock and drive up to Chicago on December 6th. That would be, or fly to Chicago. That would be miserable. So at least if we're going to get a hate game, look, they just can't lose that Grant McCaslin and company. You cannot lose that basketball game, or what is easily the worst matchup of that night turns into the most important one, because you just got beat by a team that didn't win a game in the Big East last year, Andy. That's wild stuff. Well, obviously, as we get closer to this matchup, once we're back to the fall, we'll make some predictions about who's going to win it. That'll be a lot of fun and go through it more in depth. Andy, the portal rolls on. Just one more reminder, folks. I know Andy said it off the top, but let us remind you again. The early entry deadline is Saturday at essentially midnight Eastern time. Keep in mind, those who are seniors, while they can return because they have COVID eligibility, are not held by that early entry deadline because they're not early entrants. So keep that in mind. Another thing, as Andy said, is next Wednesday is the portal closing deadline, including both undergrads and now grads as well. So if you see an influx of transfer portal entries this weekend, that is why. We will be back with you on Monday. I'm sure talking about a lot more movement that's happened over the weekend. Lots of good stuff. If you have not yet subscribed to the show on video and audio, you're missing out. We'd love to have you come subscribe to the show, be part of it. It's really easy. Just hit that little subscribe button right there on YouTube or in your favorite audio platform. Also, if you haven't joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord community to keep up with all of these randoms going on around the nation, make sure you've done that. The link is in the show notes. It's free to join. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, except I guess the Arizona Wildcats aren't in that Big East Big 12 battle. And until Monday, peace.